conversation's already started on Facebook. Fraser says, yes, it should go ahead. We should have our own oil instead of shipping it in from abroad. And Stephen says, before we answer your question, we should ask when will we be able to ban imports of oil and gas? Could we run the UK with such a ban in place? Only then can we ask whether we should drill further fields. Well, the movement of oil and gas across the world is a really interesting question. Hopefully we will get to that. Kevin Keane, BBC Scotland's Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs correspondent, hopefully can help us with that. But we're looking for your calls this morning. The Rosebank oil field and the Jackdaw gas field, you have heard about these for years now. Very controversial they have been. They have both got the go-ahead, but now this judicial review is being heard. What outcome would you like to see? 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. Scotland and the UK's largest untapped oil and gas fields. The Rosebank oil field off Shetland got the go-ahead last September. The Jackdaw gas field in 2022. Now, ultimately, environmental campaigners want both developments scrapped. They contest claims that they will boost energy security and lower bills, and they say now is the time to redouble effort to transition to renewable energy. So what do you think? Do you think that these developments should be halted or they should go ahead? 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. Do you work in the energy sector? We would love to hear from you. If you do, you can text us on 80295. Those in favour of continuing with Rosebank and Jackdaw say that they will create many hundreds of jobs in the construction of them and the ongoing running of the projects, as well as attracting investment. Now, of course, this is all against the backdrop of COP29 taking place in Azerbaijan and reports of 2024 being on course to be the warmest year on record. So Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has committed to reducing emissions by 81%, UK emissions by 81%, that is compared to 1990 levels, by 2035. And he says he wants the UK to be a leader in renewables. So how do we get to that place? Can Rosebank and Jackdaw be part of the plan or not? What do you think? Would you like to see these developments go ahead or not? 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. I've got Stephen on the line. I don't know if Stephen is the text that I've just read out. I don't know. Morning, Stephen.
Yeah, it was. It was my.
Oh, you're the same Stephen, right? Okay. Oh, yes, good. Good. You can elaborate then.
Yeah. So I think that really, before we answer the question, should we drill or not, we really need to figure out when we're going to be self-sufficient in renewable energy first. And we've got to make sure that that includes a ban on importing oil. There's no point in importing oil and cheating the system, as it were. So I really do think that we've got to seriously think about when we ban the import of any oil and gas products.
Right, OK. Well, I'm glad you raised that, because now we start to get into sort of picking the detail apart. So let's go to Kevin Keane, but stay with us, Stephen. BBC Scotland's Environment and Energy correspondent. Morning, Kevin.
Morning, Kaye.
Good morning. In terms of the movement of oil and gas around the world, is it a case that we can just become self-sufficient and stop importing stuff from elsewhere?
The short answer is no, and actually we're well beyond the point now where we are self-sufficient in both oil and gas. Oil, you really have to kind of separate the two of them apart as well. So in terms of our gas, we probably get about half of our gas domestically these days. The rest of it is brought in from abroad, shale gas, for instance, or from other parts of the world. What we have here is a kind of domestic pipeline, and then a wider set of literally pipelines that connect to places like Norway to bring some of that gas in. So a lot of where we get that gas from is down to the infrastructure. It comes out of the North Sea, either the UK or the Norwegian side. It goes down a pipeline, and then we don't really have the big gasometers that we used to have, you might remember, back in the 1980s, that store it. We literally now just send it straight to people's homes to be burnt. So that's the gas. When it comes to the oil, that's that's entirely different. That is all traded on a big open global market. In terms of what then happens to it, it's sold to the highest bidder, whoever that might be. It might be a different company, a different country. It then gets sent off to refining, and then after the refining, it might end up in a different country altogether. So in terms of the North Sea, the type of oil that we have in the North Sea, we just don't have the ability to refine that oil in the UK. So the majority of it goes usually to the Netherlands or somewhere like that for refining. We might then buy it back and bring it back into this country, and in a sense that kind of skews the figures for how much we export and how much we import. It's difficult to separate the two because it goes out of the country, but we don't have oil in this country in any significant amount where we produce it here and then we just consume it here straight away.
Right, so in terms of the Rosebank oil, the thought that you would, extract that oil, keep it for our own use, keep it here, energy security, etc., that's just not the way it works.
Not in the current system. I mean, if you were to stretch it out, if we have a national crisis, a government could take a decision that we're going to make these companies retain that oil within our country to be able to use it domestically. Physically, we would have to export it to get it processed and then bring it back again. But that still would give us a big shortfall in the amount of oil that we consume in our petrol and diesel cars or wherever else, for example.
Okay, Stephen, how does that kind of affect your thinking?
Yeah, that makes it more complicated. That does make it more complicated. But I guess the point still applies in terms of getting a renewable infrastructure already in place. Because if we don't get that ready, we're going to be importing for much, much longer,
Mm-hmm. So on balance right now, and I mean this judicial review, we're not going to go into the details of it because there are a number of potential outcomes, and I know you can hear that Kevin is outside at the moment. He's actually outside the Court of Session. As I say, it's a pretty complicated legal case, but if we're going to be simplistic about it, would you like to see these developments go ahead, Stephen, or not?
I would say we should go ahead.
You would say you would go ahead?
We'll never be ready with the renewable infrastructure in time.
OK. All right. Well, Fiona Atkinson is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. Morning, Fiona.
Oh, good morning, Kaye. Thank you for having me on.
Not at all. I'm presuming that you would be hoping that these developments of Rosebank and Jackdaw would not go ahead?
Well, I think it's shocking we're still even asking the question, should they go ahead? Because this is no longer a matter of opinion. This is a matter of science, and it's a matter of what we've just been watching on our screens in Spain. Valencia, 200 people dead, children washed away from their parents' arms. And that's the future for everybody if we keep having temperatures rising above 1.5. And this year they've gone above 1.5.
And you would be making a direct link between the development of Rosebank and Jackdaw and a contribution towards that climate emergency?
Yes, I would, because we have to stop both the extraction and the burning of fossil fuels. We have extracted enough oil and gas to get us through a transition period, and that may well involve some kind of importing. But what it really requires us to do is to put this on a wartime footing. Winston Churchill didn't say, oh, we'll never be ready, we can't possibly fight the Nazis, we're not going to be ready. Immediately, everybody went into action. And right now, we are paying 12 billion, or we have been paying for the last however many decades, 12 billion a year in tax subsidies to the oil and gas industry. We help them out. We help them to get rich with taxpayers' money, or money we should be getting back. If we made that kind of investment in renewables, in insulation, in cheap public transport, so that we weren't needing as much oil and gas, we've got to take action so that we don't need as much and we become more self-reliant on renewables.
So, Stephen, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Does that sway you?
I'm not disputing anything that... sorry, I forgot the lady's name.
Fiona.
I'm not disputing anything Fiona said. I think she's absolutely right. It's just that the reality of us getting ready in time, I'm questioning that. You know, are we motivated enough to do it? It doesn't seem like it to me, you know, because we don't have enough electric car points about, you know. We're still going to be running out. There's still a lifetime and a lot of petrol and diesel cars to run out of, as it were. So I'm not disputing anything she says, but I just question her ability to get ready.
Well, not disputing either, but just wanted to clarify, Fiona, you believe that we have already extracted sufficient oil and gas in order to take us through a transition to renewables?
We have. Across the world, we have got, I think it was a couple of years ago now, so probably got about 6 or 7 years, it's been estimated, of oil and gas already extracted.
Okay.
Now, if we
Do you mind if I just go back to Kevin here, just to get his thoughts on that? And I'm not contradicting you, Fiona, but I just want to bounce it about. Kevin, is that true, would you think?
Yeah, I think what Fiona means there is that the amount of oil and gas that's already been discovered in the world, and which is, you know, potentially at the end of a pipeline, as opposed to having been produced. So the International Energy Agency a couple of years ago looked at all of that, and it said that if we were to burn all of the oil and gas that is currently essentially at the end of a pipeline ready to be extracted, then that would be enough for that transition, to put it in simple terms. That doesn't necessarily mean that we would be burning all of that, and if some of that oil and gas is somewhere in the Middle East and we can take oil and gas from the North Sea, the industry argues that oil and gas in the North Sea can be burnt and consumed with much less of a carbon impact, because you're not shipping it across the world. They argue that the production techniques that they use in the North Sea in itself generates less in terms of carbon emissions. The carbon emissions from burning that oil, you know, as you switch on your petrol or diesel engine and drive through the streets of Edinburgh or wherever, that's going to be the same, but they're calculating the production process. I think that's what she's talking about. That is true, but the debate and a lot of the discussion is around whether we, in that interim period, use the oil and gas that's available to us closer to home, or if we continue to ship more of it in from places like the Middle East.
Okay. 08085 92 95 00 is the number this morning. I mean, clearly climate change and the negative impacts of that is very much on the global agenda at the moment. COP29 taking place in Azerbaijan. As Fiona mentioned there, we saw horrific floods in Spain, and we've seen terrible weather events in recent years. There's a real level of concern about the direction that we're going in. But we're focusing this morning on Rosebank and Jackdaw, because there is a judicial review being held today, Kevin, outside the Court of Session at the moment, whereby the development of both of those fields, one oil, one gas, is being challenged. So as a starting point, do you want to see them go ahead or not? But obviously we can talk about some of the larger issues as well. Lionel McMillan says, yes, we should be extracting oil and gas. What we take out of the ground is minuscule compared to other nations. Why are the Greenies not trying to stop other countries? Why pick on us? Fiona, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd love to. We do need, I understand where that's coming from, we do need an international treaty, and we all have to stop. I heard someone yesterday talking about playing chicken. It's as if all the countries are going, well, I'm not going to do it if you don't do it, and if we do more than them. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? We've all got to put on our grown-up big boy and girl pants and actually deal with this. This is a huge existential threat to the human race. But unlike when the dinosaurs got wiped out, they weren't looking up at the sky and thinking, oh, what's that coming at us? They didn't know. We know this is coming at us. And I'm sorry, I know you want to talk about Rosebank and Jackdaw specifically, but actually that we have to stop, because we just have to stop to save our kids. And our children and grandchildren are going to be looking at Jackdaw and Rosebank when they're huge stranded assets. And if we extract the oil and gas so that we have jobs for 10, 15 years or something, instead of getting jobs in renewables, they're going to think we're crazy. We're letting our children and grandchildren down here. We've got this one chance. We've gone past 1.5. We have seen endless extreme weather all across the world. We have just to be really grown up and make the sacrifices needed to stop now.
Well, Fiona, stay with us. We're getting lots of reaction this morning. 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. You can also leave a voice note on there or a WhatsApp message, and you can text us on 80295. We are focusing on Rosebank and Jackdaw because they're very much in the news in Scotland at the moment. But as Fiona says, this is a much, much broader conversation, and she would absolutely contend that we have to, I think, put on our big girl and big boy pants, as she says, realise the scale of the climate emergency and take the action to stop extracting oil and gas, stop burning oil and gas, she would say. Mar is in Keith. Good morning, Mar.
Morning.
Good morning. Do you agree with Fiona?
Basically, yes and no, but at the end of the day, everything should run parallel together until you get to the point that the green energy can support itself. It can't support itself. I've got solar panels on the roof of my house. They're absolutely crap in the winter, but they work very well in the summer. Getting back to...
So we're just not there yet, Mar, is that what you're saying?
Not there. Environment, 100,000 years of ice on our heads. 27,000 years ago, approximately, it started melting. Ask yourself, why did it start melting? It was global warming. It's got warmer. Just pre-industrial age, there's no ice left in Britain. I've got a great big stone in my garden that's a glacial. It came down from the Cairngorms. Lying in front of me there just now. There's no ice there. That was there before the industrial age.
So you don't think that the changes that we're seeing, the warming that we're seeing at the moment is man-made?
No. Yes and no. Partly we're putting a little bit in there ourselves, but it's on a trajectory of melting.
All right. So in terms of Rosebank and Jackdaw, what outcome would you like to see?
I'd like to see us just taking the oil out, using what we can. You always got to remember, the oil is not for putting in cars necessarily. Everything comes out of the ground in the world to make, I mean everything, including for electric cars, windmills. You need oil to make windmills. Okay. Windmills cannot make material.
So you don't see a point at which we will stop extracting oil and gas?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah,
right.
To get smarter.
Would you put a time on it?
The time is when you're ready with everything to go.
Okay.
And
but Fiona, of course, you would say you've got to decide when you're ready. You've got to say we're ready, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If you switch off the taps, if you switch the taps off tomorrow, we're in big trouble.
Fiona, do you want to respond?
I think we're in big trouble anyway, Stephen, but I do understand your point.
It's Mar. That's Mar you're speaking to.
Oh, sorry, Mar. I've made the wrong note, Mark. Yeah, we are in big trouble, though, now. I'm going to go back to those families in Valencia. That's the kind of trouble we're all facing right now. The threat is here, and we have to accept that, because the climate isn't going to wait. This is a matter of science, not opinion. This is a matter of physics. Right now, we have an overheated planet. The seas are warmer than they've ever been. The air is full of moisture, which is why we're getting these massive floods. And we have to literally bite the bullet, like Winston Churchill did. He didn't start saying, well, let's wait till we're ready for Hitler. Let's wait till we've got the army a bit bigger. They went for it. In America, overnight, Ford stopped making cars, started making tanks. We need a wartime response to this. There is no time. We've lost decades. It was in the 1970s.
Mar, do you want to respond?
Yeah.
Stop oil tomorrow. Watch what happens.
Well, if we start...
What do you think will happen, Mar?
The shells will be empty. But there'll be no tractors in the field.
Right.
Making food.
But the farmers couldn't farm this year because of the rain. The farmer after farmer on our television screens in the last winter with flooded fields and failed crops. We're going to have
we go through phases of that. But in 1963 there was a snow event. It was a total disaster for the country. People died.
Yes.
Bird life was killed.
I guess there's a difference between isolated events and what climate scientists would now say is a trend that is developing and is taking root. But Marlison, thank you. These are the thoughts that we want this morning. We have to have an open conversation about this. 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. Fiona Atkinson, who's a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, would absolutely want to see Rosebank and Jackdaw stopped. At the moment, a judicial review is being heard at the Court of Session in Edinburgh. She says we have to take the decision now. We have to have a wartime response to the climate emergency. We have to take decisions. We have to be bold. We cannot wait until we think we are ready. Mar is very sceptical about that and says there'd be nothing on the shelves. There'd be no tractors in the fields. We are just not in a position to stop extracting oil. What do you think? 08085 92 95 00. You can text us on 80295. Paul in Newton Mearn says no more oil and gas extraction, period. Not only will they exacerbate global warming, but as they are a finite resource, the infinite clean resources of wind, solar and hydropower make far more economic and energy secure sense. Mo in Edinburgh says they are going to ship the oil around the world. It will be sold to the highest bidder. No guarantees that we would help local supply. And Ian in Bothwell says it seems some climate change campaigners won't be happy until we're using horse and carts again. Let's have your thoughts. 80295 in the text is the text number, but give us a call. 08085 92 95 00. And we're going to speak to Alex Armitage, who's a Green Councillor in Shetland after this.
On BBC iPlayer.
The geographical scope of where we police is phenomenal.
Welcome to Britain's biggest beat.
Clearly quite a bit of blood.
Suspicious death, same as you would get anywhere else.
Where cutting-edge crime fighting meets traditional ways of life.
The terrain is quite hostile at times. 1 minute you're dealing with an avalanche. Come on. And the next, you've got a lively lab.
Brand new Highland Cops. Watch now on BBC iPlayer.
It is 9:23. This is Kaye Adams with you till 12 on BBC Radio Scotland. Coming up after 10 this morning.
Mick, do you want your own towel, or are you happy to share mine?
Well, I would like my own, yeah, but frankly, at this stage, I'll share your underwear if it'll get you in the car any quicker.
That's Larry Lamb, Gavin and Stacey Starr, of course, are going to be speaking to him after 10. Hoping he's going to give us a glimpse into what we can expect from the final ever episode of Gavin and Stacey this Christmas. Also this morning...
Mr. Blue Sky,
our very own Mr. Blue Sky, Brian Gilmore, our property expert, is here answering any questions at all you have about buying, selling, renting, planning, whatever it is that's exercising you about bricks and mortar. Brian can help. Give him a call or text 80295.
Call now on 08085 92 95 00.
Mornings with Kaye Adams on BBC Radio Scotland.
Right now, I am asking you if you would like to see one oil and one gas field. Rosebank is the oil field of Shetland. Jackdaw is the gas field of Aberdeen. Scotland and the UK's largest untapped oil and gas fields at the moment are subject of a judicial review. Both have permission to go ahead from the regulator, but that has been interrupted by a legal challenge by climate change campaigners, which is being heard in Edinburgh today. I want to know if you would ultimately like to see these projects go ahead or you would like to see them stopped. 08085 92 95 00 is the number to call. We've been speaking to Fiona Atkinson from Just Stop Oil. She absolutely would not want to see these developments go ahead. She says we need to develop a wartime response to the climate emergency. We need to be bold. We need to decide to stop extracting new and stop burning oil and gas. How do you feel about it? 08085 92 95 00 is the number. Alex Armitage is a Greens councillor in Shetland. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. Well, you're very close to this geographically, certainly with Rosebank. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling well. I think this court case is going to be successful, and the oil and gas fields, Rosebank and Jackdaw, will be stopped. We've seen the coal mine in Cumbria and the Horse Hill oil well in Surrey stopped because of this new court case. And so I think it's fairly clear that the direction that we're going in. I think Rosebank will be stopped, and I think that's a very good thing.
Why do you think it's a good thing?
Well, I think, first of all, for the planet, and previous callers have quite rightly spoken about the situation in Valencia, and I think we have to realise that this is small compared to what we're likely to see in the future as the climate gets even warmer. We've seen those horrific images of cars piled high being moved by floodwaters. Here in Shetland, we've seen a 25% increase in rainfall over the last few decades because of climate change, and that's having a huge effect on agriculture. Our heritage industries. We're seeing the sea temperatures in the North Atlantic just going off the scale compared to what we've seen before. Water temperatures rising by about a degree. That's good for our fisheries in the very short term, but if the temperature, fisheries industry, if the temperature keeps on rising like that, then that's going to wipe out another huge source of our economic income in the future in Shetland.
So for a whole host of
reasons,
you just do not think that we can afford to let Rosebank and Jackdaw go ahead, Alex. We've got David Cox, who's an independent energy analyst with us. Morning, David.
Good morning.
Good morning. You hear what Alex has said there. How would you respond to him?
Well, I think we have to understand that most people, sensible people, agree that we've got to make the transition away from fossil fuels to renewables. And then it just becomes a question of how you get there, the timing of it all. And then we have on the one hand, people that I would argue...
Well, Fiona says the time is now. And I think Alex would probably say the time is now.
I mean, I think the argument we can't do without Rosebank.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, David. Yeah, on you go, and then I'll let Alex back in.
It's impossible to make the transition now. Everything would grind to a halt. The economy would crash, and we'd have no fuel for our heating, for our industry, for our transport sectors. So that's impossible. So we've got to make the transition. And I think most sensible people realise we've got to do that in a way that is economically as well as environmentally sensible. And on one hand, you've got people saying...
Okay, so what would be your plan then, David?
Well, the plan would be to do it in a phased way. So we're going to be going on...
What sort of time scale are you talking about?
20, 30 years.
Right, okay.
It's going to be that sort of timing to phase out fossil fuels altogether.
So would you still be extracting new oil and gas for 20 to 30 years?
Yeah, we will be. And we will be maybe using carbon capture and storage to capture the emissions, the CO2 emissions from burning those fuels still, and putting it safely into the ground again. But we need, at the moment, and we will need for certainly the next 10, 20 years, fossil fuels in order to make that transition. And we just need to accept that as well. We need to take people with us, rather than this extreme position of everything must stop now. We must not drill for oil and gas. Now, if I have a barrel of oil in my back garden, why wouldn't I use that and produce it rather than importing it from the Middle East?
Well, listening to Kevin Keane earlier, you don't really have a barrel of oil in your back garden, or you do have it in your back garden, but then you send it across the world to get processed and refined, and then it might come back or it might go somewhere else. And this idea, that we're going to take the oil from Rosebank and we're going to keep it, and we're going to keep it for our own purposes, just doesn't seem to be, what actually happens.
No, absolutely right. It doesn't happen like that. But the point is that when you're producing it in your back garden, you're getting the royalties, or the government are getting the royalties. The people in Aberdeen have jobs, and so on. So we're actually better off financially by doing that, and also, I would argue, producing less emissions than producing it. I've driven across the Saudi Arabian desert and looked at the filthy production methods there. And we're importing that. We turn a blind eye to it. It's shipped to us, and suddenly it's okay. No, we can produce it here much more environmentally safely and soundly, and that's what we need to do until we can move away from fossil fuels.
Well, let's bring in Alex again. Alex, is David being kind of reasonable here, pragmatic, and you perhaps a bit extreme?
No, he's trying to make this into a whole black and white argument. We are having a transition. The transition is underway at pace. And we're already building the infrastructure to protect us from lack of fossil fuels in the future. I'm afraid that David sounds a bit like an oil and gas executive trying to make a case, as did the tobacco executives trying to make a case to cast doubt on the fact that smoking caused cancer. We are in a climate emergency. We need to transition, and we are transitioning. And this isn't an argument about turning the taps off tomorrow. This is an argument about whether we develop Rosebank, which is a Norwegian-owned oil field, and the oil and gas is going to be exported straight to Rotterdam or whoever can pay the best price for it.
Okay, well, David gave us his plan.
National energy security is for the birds.
Alex, sorry to interrupt there, but David gave us his plan, if you like, that we'll still be extracting oil and gas for the next 20, 30 years, that it would just be impossible to kind of just turn off the taps now. We have to accept that they're going to be part of our energy plan for 2-3 decades. What would your plan be?
My plan would be that we don't need new oil and gas fields. We've got the Clare field that's producing oil and gas at the moment. That's producing some oil that the world needs, and it's providing some jobs in Shetland and in Aberdeen. That is going to flow for the next, 5-10 years, and then it will stop. And then by then, hopefully, we'll have started to build the alternatives, and we need renewable energy, electricity production, and we also need to use some of that renewable energy to produce hydrogen, and that hydrogen production is going to take over the Sullombo oil field. I go and speak to oil and gas workers regularly. A lot of them voted for me when I stood for election on a manifesto saying that we'd oppose new oil and gas projects. Oil and gas workers, they want to feed their families, they want to have a secure job for the future, and they know that those jobs aren't in oil and gas. It's a sunset industry. Right. And when they look at the future of job security, they want to look at the hydrogen industry, the renewable energy industry, because that's what's growing, that's what's going to produce the economic sustainability that Shetland and the northeast of Scotland need in the years to come.
Well, Alex, as you say that, I've actually got Richard on the line. Sorry if you don't mind. Who is, I see, a former North Sea I'm presuming North Sea oil worker. Am I right, Richard?
Yeah, I used to work on the pipelines in 30 years ago, and we were using Japanese steel to build these lines, and the jackets for the platforms are rotten then, so we haven't used technology to keep this field pumping offshore. Why don't we pump the gas or oil onto the land, and perhaps using the machine that was used in the Channel Tunnel, bring the oil on shore, because it's got to be processed on shore ultimately anyway. But I also disagree with the danger of life in helicopters. I worked for CHC, and they almost went bust in Africa because they had to hire Kevlar-coated tanks because of the bullets that were getting fired at them. And this may happen with drone technology. I mean, you're looking at...
So you're talking about the mode of extraction, Richard, that you would take issue with. But in terms of whether or not we should continue to extract oil and gas and certainly to bring on new fields, do you think we should or not?
Well, I know that some of the Brent crude is already getting shipped to Texas because it's easily refinable. What's that about? And basically, the mode, we've got the technology to pump it onshore.
Right. But what do you see as the future of oil and gas? I mean, it was interesting. So Alex Armitage, who's a Greens councillor in Shetland, is sort of saying a 5 to 10 year timescale whereby he would see us still using oil and gas that is already being pumped but not extracting any new, whereas David Cox, as an independent energy analyst, would say we're talking 20, 30 years that we will still be using oil and gas. What time frame would you put on a transition, Richard?
It could be done relatively soon, I would imagine, with the technology available. But I reckon that it's quite dated. Sticking folk out to the North Sea, taking the risk in the helicopters is
Richard, well, you've been there and you've experienced it, and clearly at times it's very treacherous. Thank you very much, Richard. Gillian's in Bergowrie, and then we've got Robin Isla. Good morning, Gillian.
Good morning, Kay.
Good morning.
I've just more or less switched on your programme, which I find intensely interesting. Now, I'm speaking as someone who just got O-level chemistry, and that was quite a while ago. And so I'm not a chemist, but while I agree with the switch in fuel and also energy to some extent, and that's not going to come overnight, it's more complex than this, because I'm looking around my living room and I'm seeing plastic derivatives of everything, the remote control, the DVD cases, the TV, and that's the only things that I can just see. Our society in the 20th century, latter half of the 20th century, is based on a plastics materials. And as far as I was aware, that a lot of the plastics are derived from the oil process. Now, we're not just looking at fuel and energy swapping, we're looking at a whole different way of life. Everything that we take for granted that's made of plastic and other things that are, that tends to be an old-fashioned term, plastics. But there are lots of things out there that we don't even know the oil is based in that material. That would all have to go. So what we're looking at here is I do agree with David from Shetland, we're looking at a transition of 20, 30 years, because the material sciences to come up with all these alternative materials that we use in our society now, that will have to be changed. They will have to be substituted.
Well, and Gillian, that is a question that has been raised, in this phone-in already and by other people, and it's one that I would love to get the answer to as well,
exactly.
I have to say.
So would I. Because I didn't catch the first part of your programme, so when I said... when your researcher asked me that, I said, I wasn't sure if anyone had brought this in. But it's something that we don't hear in this conversation. We are so busy talking about going to EV and solar panels, etc., but we're looking at the everyday objects around us. And once we start to list them, and that's just the ones that we know, there are lots of other things that chemists will say, you don't actually know what this and this and this is, from paint, from everything. That's the question. If someone can answer that, I agree with you, Kay. I would love to know.
Well, Gillian, we've got Alistair Thomas with us, who's just popped up, who is a Scottish energy analyst with True North. Morning, Alistair.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
No, not at all. Can you answer that question for Gillian and for me, I have to say?
Regarding the products that are finding come back to Scotland and the UK?
Well, yeah, the fact that oil is in so many plastics, our TV remote, all these kind of objects that we use as part of our lives, the oil is part of their makeup.
Yeah, look, we all recognise and support the end goal here, which is to move past oil and gas. But in terms of getting past it, it's a very complex picture. We need to see various things take place at once. We need to see offshore wind capacity installed at rates we've never seen before, grid connection installed at unprecedented levels to bring that electricity to our major cities, and widespread use of equipment like heat pumps replacing our gas boilers, electric vehicles replacing our petrol and diesel cars, and there's various other products that your last caller was referring to there as well that we'll need to find alternatives to. So it's a very complex picture, and shutting down the North Sea prematurely could bring energy security concerns directly in terms of our gas, but also those refined products that are part of that European energy security picture that we're part of. We have for decades now been sending crude to refineries in Europe. We import that back as those refined products and plastics and synthetics. So a complex picture that Scotland remains part of that European energy security piece, and as an importer
what would prematurely be for you?
Well, here in Aberdeen, we have the largest concentration of subsea expertise in Europe. We're pretty uniquely positioned to take on work in new energies like floating offshore wind. However, just last week, we saw from a Chamber of Commerce survey, only 8% of business activity is expected to come from offshore wind for these firms by the year 2030. In my mind, that's staggeringly low. So in the interim period, as we try to ramp up renewables, we need work to protect jobs, lest we see companies exit the region and invest overseas. We saw that in previous downturns in 2014, more recently during the COVID pandemic. And the majority of the industry is made up of supply chain firms, operators like Shell and Equinor. These are just the tip of the iceberg. The skills and expertise to build and engineer the energy transition, that's housed in the supply chain. They need work in the interim period to sustain themselves, to ensure they're fit and healthy. And pre-2030, that's certainly too early on the basis of that survey of last week.
OK. We have with us Tessa Khan, who's Climate Lawyer Director of Uplift. You may have heard her already on Good Morning Scotland talking about her objection to the development of Rosebank and Jackdaw. Morning, Tessa.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I know you'll want to respond to Alistair as well, but I really want to get an answer to Gillian's question. Gillian, would you mind putting your question again to Tessa and see what she says? Go on, Gillian.
Yes, by all means, Kate. My question is, and I think Alistair has just obviously reiterated it, this is a far more complex issue. In as much as, yes, fuel and energy, vital that we do try and have this transition onto non-fossil-based fuel and energy, but it's our whole society, it's our whole plastic-based society. As I said to Kate, I'm just standing in my living room looking at remote controls that are made of plastic, wires that are made of plastic, blinds that are plastic-based. Our whole material science would have to be in there, cutting edge, to substitute all these products that we take for granted that are plastic-based and hence from oil. As I said, I've only got O-level chemistry, and that's a long time ago. But, if someone answers that question to say, yes, the transition is going to go ahead, but our way of life, things that we accept as just, taken off the shelves, where are all these new materials going to be substituted for any of these oil-based materials that we take for granted every day? And Alistair hasn't been able to answer that either. He just said, it's a complex issue.
Tessa?
So, Tessa, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gillian. Look, in short, if all we were doing was drilling for enough oil to produce plastic, we would be drilling for significantly less oil and certainly gas than we currently are, and that oil and gas companies are currently focused on producing. So plastics are a tiny part of the picture. The vast majority of oil and gas goes towards various other kinds of energy uses, like
how tiny, Tessa? Can you put a number on it?
Oh, it's less than 10% of oil, for example, that goes towards being used in petrochemicals. And the vast majority of it goes towards, for example, heating our homes, going into vehicles. Obviously, that is where the transition is happening incredibly rapidly. And the UK is far behind other countries. But even in the UK, we had a record volume of our electricity, for example, generated from renewable energy supplies in the last year. I think the other really important point to make, just in relation to Gillian's concerns, is that, she's talking about our way of life, and that being something that needs fundamentally to change if we are to make this transition. The fact is that if we don't do this transition in a fast and fair way, we will continue to see, for example, Scottish farmers dealing with the worst flooding, the worst harvest that they've seen in 30 years. We'll see flooding of British businesses, people cleaning up, council costs, community costs, ordinary people's homes being affected. We just had a whole year's worth of rain dumped in the south of Spain, killing 200 people. I mean, the future is going to look different one way or another, and we can absolutely, it is a political choice how we do this transition. Scotland in particular stands to benefit from its massive renewable resources. Alistair's point about supply chains is right, and those supply chains can be pivoted with the right support, policy support and investment support to support the renewable energy industry. The UK's got the second biggest offshore wind market in the world, and it is really up to us to make sure that in the future the generation of renewable energy creates jobs that stay here in Scotland, that they create supply chains, that investment continues to support local communities, because the oil and gas sector is in irreversible geological decline, and actually 200,000 jobs supported by that sector have been lost in the last decade, despite hundreds of new oil and gas licences being issued. And that's because, as I said, it is a physical reality that that basin is declining.
Well, Gillian, there you go. I think that's a fairly comprehensive response. What do you think?
It is comprehensive. I mean, when Tessa's thinking about 10%, I mean, is that 10% of our oil and gas is used for
chemicals,
chemical-based products, or is that 10% globally that the oil is used for that?
Tessa?
I'm not sure about that statistic, Gillian, but I can tell you that the vast majority of the oil that we produce in the UK goes, as Alistair said, into refineries to end up being turned into things like jet fuel and diesel. It is mostly about transport, and we are about to see a further decrease in the price of electric vehicles in countries like Germany.
I think it's obviously something that needs to be explored and it needs to be highlighted, because any new materials that will have to be sort of turnkey ready will also have quite an initial cost because they're new products. So therefore, again, when I'm talking about our way of life, fundamentally changing, because the plastics, everything's throwaway society we're used to, although we're supposed to be recycling them. Any new materials that will be coming on to substitute this are going to cost, and therefore these are all the hidden things that we don't know about yet.
But Gillian, what do you think about Tessa's argument that, you know, our way of life is inevitably going to change because of the impact of the climate emergency?
I agree. I think it's the fact that not enough information and the what is actually our future going to look like. As I say, we concentrate so much on fuel and energy. If someone said, had a picture of a room and took everything out of it that is based on the oil-based, materials that we use, I think people would get a shock.
Yeah, but when you look at what happened in Valencia 2 weeks ago, were you shocked by that?
Of course I was shocked. I mean, also, Valencia was on a floodplain as well. Sometimes with these things, areas shouldn't be built on. More precautions, building regulations, there's a lot in that. But yes,
I think they had a year's worth of rain in a few hours.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just saying people need to be told the full story and give this projection as to how our life would actually change. And as I said before, I think a good example would be to take a room, take the things out of it that are plastics from the oil-based industries, and then see what we're left with. And that would focus people's minds as to what we're really doing and what we're up against and how much they will be willing to pay for this, because there is going to be a large cost onto this. Yeah,
there's costs either side, I think. Gillian, listen, thank you very much. Really appreciate you getting in touch. 08085 92 95 00. Use that number and keep the texts coming in. Excuse me, I'll get through. I'll be back after a little cough break.
Join us for another big night of BBC Children in Need.
Have we got a show for you?
With a Doctor Who exclusive. We are going to rock through at 7 on...
You seriously think that I'm just looking at some of your texts coming in, and there are lots of them coming in. Part of the argument for going green is that North Sea oil and gas is running out. I've worked on the oil rigs for major oil companies since 1984, and there are still many untouched reserves offshore, such as Cambo, Jackdaw, and of course Rosebank, which we're discussing today. Do you seriously think that highly experienced North Sea oil and gas workers will simply walk away from their oil and gas jobs they love and transfer into green energy? Lol, they will travel overseas to work. And David Aberdeen says expansion of renewables needs the oil and gas supply chain. The pace of investment in renewables is less than the decline in investment in oil production. We therefore risk losing the supply chain as it disappears elsewhere in the world. A successful transition requires continued oil and gas investment. Get your thoughts in 08085 92 95 00, or you can text us on 80295. Still to come. Tell me tomorrow. Property search.
Time. Not.
And Rob is in Isla. Good morning, Rob.
Hello, Kay.
Good morning.
I'll try and keep it. I'll try and keep it great. Well done. The people you've had on, they've covered all the aspects. Fiona has explained exactly what the problem are. Just stop oil. We're out of time. There's one word they're not using. It's now. There is no more time. When you get people like David Attenborough warning us that, listen, we've got about 6 years and we're looking at extinction. We've got desertification already coming into southern and eastern Europe. That's affecting crops. That's affecting food. People start squeaking when it's not on their shelves. All the rain that's happening in Spain, Valencia. You know, if you go down there, it's mile after mile, acre after acre of polytunnels down there, growing the food. That's how come we get our lovely peppers in the middle and the different vegetables and salads in the middle of winter. We have to change our way of life. Now, it's not going to, well, it will affect us, but the people it's really going to affect is our children and our grandchildren. I made a decision about 50 years ago not to have kids because I could see what was coming. This isn't all new. Neil Young, 50 years ago, was singing about this. The people have known, the oil companies have known. We simply don't have any more time. The damage we're doing, the icebergs, they're not talking about the huge ice sheets that have come away down into all that water's going into it. One of the things it's affecting is the Gulf Stream. The flow that comes up and goes back down, that goes on round down the tip of South Africa. That affects our weather up here in the winter, but when that thing shudders to a halt, that will put us straight back into another ice. Maybe that film, the day after tomorrow, it's nuts. We have to change. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable it is. The longer we leave it, the worse it is. And if the scientists are right, we are looking at a handful of years.
Well, I mean, Rob, I can feel your level of concern. I'm sure everybody can. And you're looking at the kind of the big picture. Do I have to ask you what you think about Rosebank and Jackdaw?
We can't do it.
Just can't do it.
What we have to do, war footing's been used, we have to crack the battery problem for storing this stuff. It is ridiculous that we're having to turn off renewable wind energy already. You know, for the last few years, the last couple of years anyway, Scotland has been producing enough wind energy to power the domestic needs of the whole country. And it's been switched off because of the contract to the gas, and they stopped using the coal. And people were saying, what else do we have instead of oil products? You know, there's a plant, hemp. We can grow that. We can use it in building materials. You can 3D print houses. You don't need insecticides. It will make we can make clothes from it. There are alternatives. The problem that our governments have got is you and me, because we're used to it. Our grandparents out in areas like this, they were using candles 2 generations ago. And we're tweaking about. You look at your TV at night, any city they go to, and then you understand what the problem the governments are facing.
Yeah.
You look at a cityscape at night, lights everywhere.
Well, I mean, I totally appreciate that you're looking this on the biggest scale possible, Rob, but I did ask you about Rosebank and Jackdaw. You said very emphatically they just cannot go ahead, given the context that you have given us as you see it. Arthur and Argyll, would you agree with Rob?
Thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we've got you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I don't agree at all with what I just heard a second ago. And the reason for that is that the person is not thinking about the fact that we do not have the backup available through batteries for when the wind is not blowing. Like today in Argyll, there's not a breath of wind here. It's completely still. And there's no sun either because it's very foggy. So we've got no sun, no wind, and these cannot be stored at the moment. We're not anywhere near having the battery power to supply large areas of population. So we need to have the gas. Now, here's the big problem that a lot of people don't think about, I think. Why is it that the UK's electricity bills are the highest in the world? They are. We have the highest electricity bills in the world at the moment. And the reason for that is because we're paying for electricity twice. First of all, we're paying through the wind and the solar, which are often heavily subsidised. And we're also paying to keep the natural gas going continuously, so it's available when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, which is really quite a lot of the time, especially in winter time, when we have these dunkelflaute. You've probably heard of that. Dunkelflaute, that means when there's no wind and there's no sun. So how are they going to solve that problem?
Well, I mean, Arthur, I think, to be fair, Rob mentioned that as well. Let me bring in Alistair Thomas, who's an energy analyst. Alistair, where are we with storage of renewable energy?
Well, it's one of these conflation of issues that we discussed just a few moments ago. As regards the electricity price, it's true we do need to decouple electricity prices from gas. That's to do with our base load and what we see as our kind of minimum and our backup generation. Now, to get away from that, as we said at the start, we're going to have to really ramp up offshore wind capacity, grid connection, and getting widespread use of this equipment like heat pumps and electric vehicles in place so that we can ultimately move to a cheaper electricity system. But yeah, baseload power and battery storage, these are all challenges that need to be addressed in short order. And there's a lot of discussion today about way of life in the UK, and we need to get this transition right at the right time with a joined-up industrial strategy. You know, your listeners will be familiar with the impact of deindustrialisation in Scotland, the impact on coal communities in Scotland. So we just need to have a joined-up approach to this and a pragmatic one to ensure that nobody is left behind.
Can I just comment on
Sure.
what I just heard there? So the interesting thing about that is that he's talking about a pragmatic approach to transition and we have to sort these things out. But he didn't address the point, which is that if you ramp up a huge amount of wind power, if you want that to solve the problem on a continuous basis, you still have to have natural gas if you haven't got batteries. Now, at the moment, can I just tell you this? It's very interesting in California, because California's in exactly the same situation as the UK. They've got by far the highest electricity bills in the USA because they've gone right down the road of renewables. And they're discouraging as much as they can. They're closing down nuclear. They're closing down oil and gas stations continuously. There's no coal whatsoever. Understandable. The climate change problem is a big issue. But they're not addressing the issue of the lack of battery storage.
Well, let me bring in Tessa on that then. I mean, and I'm aware of time. Tessa Khan, who is a climate lawyer. Tessa, would you like to pick that up with Arthur?
Yeah, I would actually, just because I agree with the point that the UK does have the highest energy bills in Western Europe, and we saw the huge cost of that on households and ordinary families across the UK a couple of years ago in particular. But the reason for the fact that we have the highest household energy bills is twofold. The first is that the UK is more dependent on gas to generate electricity than most of its European neighbours. And it was wholesale gas prices that went through the roof when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's our dependency on gas that drove up our household energy bills, not on renewables, which at one point were 10 times cheaper as a source of electricity than gas. And the second thing is that we have cold, leaky homes that mean that our homes are incredibly inefficient to heat. So, you know, if again, going back to the point earlier about looking at somebody's room in an ordinary house and what this transition will do, it will ensure that we have warmer homes, that people aren't just losing heat through their windows and through their ceilings, and that ultimately household energy bills can come down, because there is absolutely no question that renewable energy is significantly cheaper, significantly less wasteful than gas as a source of electricity.
How prophetic that, you know, the bell tolls at that point there, Tessa. Listen, thank you very much. Really interesting discussion. Thanks to everyone who got in touch.
Wake up to Good Morning Scotland for the latest news.
Everything you need to